an absolute honor and privilege being back to you here. And, last time we had in such an interesting conversation, whereby we had Dr. Deane, also as one of our guests that we had on the show. And we really unpacked the invisible disability, the impact that it had. And what we found during that is that um, education and empowering our society is so much key to this discussion that we are having. And therefore, tonight, we have our distinguished guest here tonight with us, from the Department of Education, Ms. Relebohile Shata. And I'm really sure, that I'm going to give you an opportunity also for her to introduce herself, our guest here on the show. And, once again, our anchor and Miss Kirsten Deane. I'm really so grateful, that you are also a part of this conversation, and I think having us here tonight will also guide and enlighten our audience tonight about the impact of also education, the importance of raising awareness of the importance of education to specifically our persons with disabilities in society. Well, without any further ado, let me give straight over to our guests to also say something about themselves. Lebo, in short, over to you.
Thank you, Kaz. Good evening to you and to Kirsten, as well as to your listeners and viewers. As you've already said, I'm Relebohile, and I am from Matatiele, a very small town on the border of Eastern Cape and KZN. I am employed by the Western Cape Education Department as an educator at for deaf children in Witterboma, Wynberg. I've been working there this is my third year now. I started in 2022, and I did my B.Ed in foundation-based teaching at the University of Free State at the Bloemfontein campus.
Oh, that's quite amazing. Well, Kirsten, good evening.
Evening, Kaz. Yeah, I think that, it's always important for us to start these conversations with talking about and highlighting the importance of creating disability awareness, because that's, the mission behind everything that we do, behind what I do, behind what you do, Kaz, and Oppie Ball as a whole. And I think that where the importance comes from in disability awareness is that education surrounding disabilities cannot be done without the awareness of the various, types of disabilities that exist, that people are living with, how it affects their everyday lives, their lived experiences. And having conversations like this, really, it's a great starting point to, get people together, people like Lebo, who has experience of working with and assisting children with disabilities. And I think it's so important that we constantly remind ourselves that we are here to create disability awareness. And speaking of which, I would love to actually ask you, Kaz, what does disability awareness mean to you, and what kind of concepts would you link to that?
Yes, that is so profound and beautiful. In the context of education, improving education and awareness, especially amongst families and parents and children with disabilities. These requires our targeted initiatives that we really need to come up. Providing information, support, setting up resource centers in our communities, setting up support structures, that will provide these resources, setting up hubs for persons with disabilities, where also children and parents can come together within a community and have the access to these resource centers, whereby now they can ventilate, whereby they can having access, and also, as we learned, is that parents also, have a need to attend these workshops and not only let it be preached to also persons with disabilities alone or in separation of just limited to, for example, caregivers and persons with disabilities. But I think it's high time that we involve the parents. It's high time that we also provide these training to the parents so the parents can also be on part of what's happening, also have the equal access that we want, and not playing the distant role, for example, that used to be, and relying on external information, but now they can have the opportunity to attend these sessions in order to have first-hand information about making informed decisions of how to deal with these issues that pertaining to families with disabilities within their immediate families. And I think that is, the importance of parent support groups, peer support groups, as a strategy that we can look at how to, or when we drive disability awareness within the educational space. This is one of the strategies talking about education, because everything is happening on a grassroots level, and for us facilitating this type of support can really enhance our objectives in terms of promoting an inclusive society as one of the aims that we are trying to achieve with raising awareness in our sector.
Amazing. Thank you, Prof. And it's so important what you are saying about, having conversations and workshops for parents and caregivers of, children with disabilities. And I think that's why it's so amazing that we have Lebo with us here tonight. And, following what you just mentioned, I'd love to move over to Lebo and really ask you, Lebo, when it comes to disability awareness in schools, what do you see that is being done to help with the awareness, and also what isn't being done, what's missing?
Thank you for the question. So I firstly want to agree with Kaz when he speaks about involving parents. I think that's an essential component of a child's well-being. And when we leave parents behind, it creates because remember that a child develops their sense of being from home, and you yourself came to believe in yourself and in a lot of things because your parents gave you that motivation. So I think it's really important that we take parents along and we involve them in everything that we do. So with regards to the school, I think that the greatest and I think the most important challenge and opportunity is inclusion. Inclusive education is by far the greatest move that schools are making. Inclusion is in various ways. It could be through the curriculum, which is teaching learners about various disabilities. That's learners in mainstream and in special needs, because some of them, they may be in special needs, but they're not fully aware of other persons with disabilities that exist out there. Some of them know about them, but they're not too clear about how they go about their day-to-day lives. For example, a deaf child doesn't really know how a blind person lives their life. And when you teach them and introduce to them basic concepts like how they read, it's very intriguing for them, but it's also very informative. So the curriculum is one of the ways in which inclusion takes place, and it starts as early as in the foundation phase, where learners are taught rather about different persons with different disabilities, such as the blind and the immobile, and also the deaf, for those who are not in schools for deaf children. And it is also designing learning activities to allow every child to participate in learning activities and in the learning process, and so that they also experience success in their learning. This goes straight through to varsity. access creates various disability support units, and inclusion can also be through structuring facilities to allow ease of movement to persons with disabilities. We also have special needs schools that offer the same grounds of success as mainstream schools to children with special needs or special learning needs. These schools expose their learners to various things and opportunities, and thus creating awareness to the public that there's nothing that a disabled person cannot do besides not being able to use the skills and senses that they were born without, and or things that require their natural limitations. In terms of our school, as a school for deaf children, because I mentioned that I work at a school for deaf children, we create awareness in as many spaces as possible. I have the privilege of conducting a choir that performed last year at the
Yes, Kirsten, you know,
what's escape, where they had a Catholic Schools Festival that happened at the City Hall last year. And to my surprise, there were so many people who were not aware of the abilities and music perceptions of people. So yeah, that's some of the things that the school is doing. And if I think that a lot could be done. There's room for improvement in terms of teaching people about persons with disabilities. And I think that mainstream schools should be more intentional about joining the movement. And I speak of schools because that's the environment that I'm most familiar with. They could take their learners to schools with children with disabilities, even if it's just for sporting events with single schools, to forge a relationship between the two groups of people. And I know of a school that does this already, but I do think that more schools could join the movement. Kirsten, your mic is muted.
Thank you, Lebu. I think it's so amazing and so important, what you mentioned about creating awareness for the children living with these disabilities about other disabilities as well. I think that's something that we tend to forget about or overlook, that children with disabilities also need to be informed about other types of disabilities that exist around them. And thinking about that, I want to ask you, Lebu, what do you believe can be done in order to improve, the lived experiences of the youth that are living with disabilities?
Kirsten, I think the first thing that anyone or everyone has the responsibility to do. I mean, we can create awareness, but it's up to the other person to receive what we tell them, what we share. So teachers and learners in mainstream schools should learn about persons with disabilities and how they perceive the world, as well as their experiences, their lived experiences of people around them. Once they become aware of their agency in the lives of others, they'll be more intentional with their conduct. That's how they receive persons with disabilities and how they relate to them. If a school has 3 days in their calendar to go on an excursion for leisure, they can set aside 1 day just to go to a school with learners with disabilities, and just to observe their day and to observe their struggles and successes. Because just because these children are disabled doesn't mean that there's nothing successful that they experience in their day-to-day lives. It can be even getting off a wheelchair onto a toilet. That's a success for them, because that's something they're able to do for themselves. It's a basic life skill that they're able to perform for themselves. They can write, they can do, because I've become very surprised at the kind of questions I get about deaf people. And I just think they're just deaf, you know. So if they can spend a day in the lives of people with disabilities and observe their struggles and successes, they might recognize how human persons with disabilities are.
Absolutely. Kirsten, you know, it was so profound what Lebo mentioned there, and it made me think of about the different networks in our communities. It's starting at a youth level platform. You know, if you think of our the ambassador program that we are currently have in the organization, where we also empower our youth through the mentorship programs in schools already, where the learners are using this program, this ambassador program from Oppie to take back to their communities and integrate it as part of their life skills programs in schools already. And you know, mentorship and peer support programs, those are the things that Lebo rightfully said. You know, it's our responsibility to advocate for that, you know, at an early stage already. So we empower the youth with empowerment programs that speaks on inclusion, that speaks about mainstreaming, that speaks about integration, you know, that aims to change the status quo and the narrative about disability being excluded from mainstream society, and that we have to cater for persons with disabilities at a separate platform apart from the mainstream community. So, you know, this is why we also want to promote independent living, you know, through these programs that we are advocating for. So, Lebo, you are spot on there. Thank you for that.
And if I just might add, Kaz, like I like the fact that you mentioned integration, because I think that's where we're all trying to go as advocates for people living with disabilities, because for many years people living with disabilities have been segregated. And you know, when you consider the different identities that are linked to a person, be it your race, your gender, your financial background, people living with disabilities have had that extra burden, if I can call it that, when it comes to segregation. Them being disabled added to their problems, so to speak, because they've been segregated for so long. They've been denied access to education. They've been denied access to jobs. And so you can imagine how difficult it must have been. So going towards a society that is disability aware, where everyone is integrated into society, where everyone lives peacefully and as far as possible happily, that would be so great. Like if you can imagine that kind of society, and you can just imagine how many happy faces you'll see around more, and how many people actually let their children enter into society freely. Because I come from a small town where I wasn't exposed to a lot of people with disabilities, unless they could walk by themselves, even if they were on crutches. They and if their disabilities were severe, the chances of us seeing those people were quite slim, because they're locked inside their houses because of the stigma and all of these words that you could attribute, or that were used rather to label people. So
Yes, yes.
if we could move towards an integrated society, then everyone living with disabilities or without a disability could live and coexist together so freely and happily.
Yes, you know, that is very true. You're making me think of in this week, we had a meeting with the Gauteng police disability management group within the whole Gauteng. And one of the things, whilst I was giving them a presentation, was I told them that everyone around this table, just because you guys are here today, makes you ambassadors for the rights of persons with disabilities. And I think, you know, when we are committing towards this cause, we must take our responsibility, and we must drive and take ownership of our responsibility, like you said, as ambassadors, driving the awareness, driving the message, in order to change the status quo, not having to cater for persons with disabilities separately, like I said, but really make them an integrative part of what we are doing. When we are sitting around the table, persons with disabilities must sit around the table. We can't say nothing about us without us, yet we want to decide and discuss issues around disability on behalf of persons with disabilities. And I also think, going, like you said, Lebo, about talking about the different etiquettes, disability etiquette, changing the way that people used to talk about and used to address persons with disabilities. I think this is really part of the educational journey pertaining to our quest in really driving the message of awareness. Kirsten?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything, that you both said. And I think it's, Kaz, you mentioned about, if we are sitting at a table, we need persons with disabilities sitting there with us as well. And I think for you and I, Kaz, it's always so interesting and so helpful when we have guests that don't, have a disability like Lebu. And, you and I come from, our passion for the work that we do comes from our own experiences of living with our own disabilities. And I often think about, how families process the disabilities that their children live with, their parents live with. And I actually want to ask the question of what do we think is being done in communities, in group settings, family homes, to create awareness around disabilities? And linking to that, what are the effects of families not being aware of the lived experiences of their children? And I'd love to hear Lebu's thoughts on that. What, from a teacher's point of view, what have you seen as the effects of families not being fully aware of these lived experiences?
Yeah, I think the greatest challenge that I have observed when interacting with parents who aren't fully aware of their children's disabilities or limitations and experiences, I think the biggest problem is communication. When communication lacks between a child, and I'm speaking from the perspective of a teacher of a deaf child, when there's, I think, let me start by saying this. When a parent is not fully aware of their children's lived experiences, it shows that there is a lack of communication, which results in a strain on their relationship. And you can imagine if when you tell someone, think of a situation where you tell someone something and they gaslight you, or they don't understand anything that you're saying, and you feel frustrated. So they just add to their children's frustrations. And I think that like there's so much that could be done. We're already doing so much already. Well, not so much, but we are doing a lot, I could say. I can't say so much because I can't really measure how much is so much and how little is so little. But I can say that our school offers free sign language classes to families and of our learners and our learners' parents, and also to the public every second Saturday. And the more people become aware of these classes, they come. Sometimes we'd sit in a Monday briefing and be told by teachers who were present during the Saturday that more people who more people who attended, the class were actually the general public and not parents and families of our learners. And I think that's a good sign also, that the public is becoming more interested in learning sign language. And during Deaf Awareness Month, we have an entire program that our school plans, where our learners and some of our teachers, they go to different schools to raise awareness about the deaf. And there are also individuals such as myself who use their social media accounts to create deaf awareness. In my personal time, I teach 3 people. It's not a lot, but I teach people sign language for free. And you know, when we realize, as Kaz said, when we own this, I'd say, let me just say, calling that we have, that, and when we realize that we are agents of change, and when we realize that we're ambassadors, you use every platform and every chance you get to make people aware of the disabilities that you are aware of and that you know about. And it doesn't have to be a lot, like all that you know, just tell people, do your best to teach people about all that which you know. And you, the more you know, the more you will spread, you know, the more you will teach others. And if you, it's like planting a seed. If you tell someone something about what you know, you've planted a seed, and they too will develop an interest, and they'll learn about this themselves.
Yes, yes. You know what? One of the things you are so right, Lebo. Thank you for that. One of the things sometimes that one tend to, I almost want to say underemphasize, is the power in collaboration with community partnerships. And I think, you know, that also plays one critical role, whereby, for example, we need the buy-in from, for example, local government, the business sector within our within our community, immediate communities, schools, you know, community organizations. All these partnerships go hand in hand, and these partnerships can even strengthen our position, you know, for leveraging these partnerships to strengthen the sector and to even enhance the impact that our awareness programs is making at the end of the day. One of the local businesses, you know, at some stage asked me, please, 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 if you guys can bring us persons with disabilities that also, you know, falls within our qualifying criteria, we would love to employ also persons with disabilities. And I also think, you know, is that the more awareness that we can create, the more the focus will shift on the ability of persons with disabilities, and to break down that stereotype that persons with disabilities needs to be, like I say, catered for. You know, I often say, don't cater for the persons with disabilities. They are not food. Make them an integrated part of our programs. They are equal participants in our societies. We are equal participants in our society. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thank you, Kaz. Yeah, I mean, I love everything that you were saying there. I think that's a topic that we've spoken about in our private conversations, Kaz, about how it's not about creating accommodation. It's about creating a world where accommodation doesn't have to take place. You know, it's about already having these things in the education system, and also creating these opportunities for parents and families to learn and hear about the lived experiences of their children, what they go through on a day-to-day basis. And I think one of the things that we briefly touched on in the previous episode was that, you know, there's so much more to living with a disability than just the physical aspect of it. You know, we often forget to ask the questions about the sociological effect, the emotional effect, all those things. It plays such a big part. And, you know, just the way we experience the world. I always, Lebo, I always say to Kaz, and I always say to my colleagues that as people living with disabilities, you get to a point where you start to realize it's actually, you know, it's a blessing, because you're experiencing the world in such a unique way that nobody knows, you know, what this experience is like. And it's like a double-edged sword, because nobody knows, but also it's the special gift that you have been, you know, been given to experience the world in this way. So I think it's, you know, it's so important that we create opportunities for people with disabilities to share their lived experiences also, and to share it with their families, and not just talk about, you know, the obvious things that people would assume or see that they struggle with, but also the things that people don't see. And I think that's why, you know, it's so amazing that at the school where Lebo works, they have all these initiatives, and we need more things like that, and not just at schools that are for individuals with disabilities, but also mainstream schools. And that's what we are pushing for, and that's what we are trying to change, because it still creates a segregation of, why is there only these conversations happening at schools where there are children living with disabilities? Why not in the mainstream schools as well? Because that's where, the main problem is, when people kind of create this bridge between us as individuals with disabilities and people without them. And I think it's really important that we, like Lebo said, use every opportunity and moment that we have to educate people on what we know and what we understand, and to just create that awareness. And with that, I think it's been an amazing conversation tonight. And just to wrap us off, I would like to, Lebo, do you have anything that you would like to say before we end the conversation?
I would just like to, and I always say this, like I say this to my mom all the time. I feel like, I think, I always say that I don't like people who say I feel, because it's not about feelings sometimes. I think that parents have shortcomings, and this is not to put them in a bad light. I just think that they struggle a lot with being present. And this is just from my perspective, from my professional perspective, that they struggle a lot with being present parts of their children's lives. And I really just want to stress the matter of communication. The strength and depth of any relationship lies in the nature and frequency of communication between two parties. So if parents can just give themselves time, firstly to educate themselves, yes, about their children, but also just to communicate with their child. The same way that a parent of a child in a mainstream school will ask a child, how was your day? What did your teacher say? What did your friends say? If you first try to, in the case of a deaf child, you learn their language, and even if your child is not deaf, you communicate with the child. Ask those small questions. Those questions will inform you of their lived experiences. And if they try to reach out to other parents, because they need to realize that my child is going to a school for deaf children. They're not the only learner in the school. There are other parents who are going through the same thing and experience that I am going through. So if they can just recognize that and reach out to other parents and be a part of circles of parents who have children living with disabilities, there's so much that they could learn. You know how you learn about some people's experiences through conversations with other people. The same could happen with them, they could learn about the lived experiences of other children, even if their child might not have gone through the same experience, or maybe they are yet to go through the experience. They may be more equipped in the future, if they have conversations with other parents of children living with disabilities and learn what those children are going through, and, and just share information, and just to have that, just to form that chain and circle of support for one another. And that would mean so much to the children, because so many conversations are not had between parents and children because of a lack of communication and a strained relationship. So if parents, I just like to encourage parents to do their part, and it doesn't require a lot. It can be taking your child on a play date if you can afford it with their peer or friend who has the same disability. It can be small things like having conversations with other people. If they can just try by all means to not isolate themselves and exist as a part and a member of society, the mainstream society and the society of people living with disabilities. I think that a lot of pressure could be taken off their shoulders. They could be less overwhelmed and more equipped to be able to care for their children and to be a part of their children's lives. And they will be, in turn, be able to include their children in their families and recognize that this child is a member of our family, and therefore we will treat this child equally in the same way that we treat every other child.
Thank you so much, Lebo. Thank you for that. Prof, do you want any last words, comments to wrap us off?
Well, I'm so inspired by Lebo tonight. I think our audiences and our listeners really, there's already a long bus but it's just unfortunate that we need to wrap up. Otherwise, I would have loved to read some of the brilliant comments, that Lebo got here tonight. But I think this really calls for some continuous and future communication, just as the objective of learning, continuous learning that we want to aim for. I think this also calls for a continuous and a follow-up conversation. One of the things that our listeners don't know behind the scenes, where the talk about with Lebo about introducing also sign language on our podcast. So everyone out there, watch closely. You'll be seeing so much more of Lebo on this podcast, as he will also take our listeners through through one or two some tips on sign language. Well, everyone, I just want to say, Kirsten, you were an amazing host today. Lebo, really, thank you so much for your time that you've set aside to be here with us. So thank you for that, and for that that insight that you gave there. Well, there are many reasons why we should consider to support the initiatives and support awareness for persons with disabilities. There are many reasons why we should be the advocates, why we should be the change of the future that we want to see. But the most profound reason and motivation for being an ambassador is it's the right thing to do. Do your part as an ambassador for driving disability awareness. Thank you for your time here tonight. Cheers.
Thank you.